Hi there, good morning. I'm Lila MacLellan from Fortune, and I'm here with Liza Landsman from Stash. Really excited to be here today. It's a very popular topic, tech, money, and being your own boss. You might have better stats than this, but I saw a Microsoft survey from last year that said 76% of Gen Z workers are interested in one day being their own boss, and that was from a survey of like 20,000 people. And that's much higher than the Gen X sort of ambition. So I wonder if you can tell me a little bit about, first tell us a little bit about Stash, but also how does it enable that dream of working for yourself?
Sure. Well, good morning, everyone. And I'm excited to be here today with Lila. We actually had some other fellow panelists who got stuck back in the States.
Right.
But the two women made it, so I feel we should get a little round of applause for that. Well, delighted to be here to talk to you about what we're doing at Stash and also kind of how this all plays into the American dream. So you cited that really interesting statistic. Another one that actually really resonated with me, 2019 was the first year ever in the US where more sort of workers filed non-W2 taxes than W2 taxes, meaning more people were kind of making money in sort of like the side hustle nation than on standard salary.
Amazing.
Which is sort of incredible when you think about it and represents a couple of, I think, really important trends. One, that technology and the sort of democratization of the tech stack broadly has enabled more people than ever to actually start pursuing the dream of being their own boss. But I also think, interestingly, during the last couple of years in the pandemic, as people have realized they don't need to be tethered to one space and necessarily to one company, and have sort of opened their eyes about this sort of like global nomadism, it's really changed the way people think about work. Now, at Stash, the three largest employers of our consumer customer base are Walmart, Amazon, and the US Army.
Interesting.
Right? So it tends to be very hourly workers. Our mission at Stash is to help these consumers achieve their dreams and goals by helping them achieve economic security and independence through investing, because we know that access to equities as an asset class is the single greatest wealth creation engine. And historically, lower and middle income consumers in the US have been pretty much boxed out of this. And so our goal is to kind of help them get over the hump from an economic perspective and therefore create the confidence and the economic security to allow them to pursue those dreams outside of traditional workforce.
Have many of your clients sort of expressed that interest in adding a side hustle or starting their own company with what they're earning?
Yeah, I mean, I think our clients and our consumers, like many Americans, it's a combination of they've expressed that desire, but also for many, there's actually a necessity.
Yeah.
Right? Because the achievement of long-term economic security rarely can be done these days on at least just one income. And so we see the pursuit of those outside interests. It is often actually the ability to find some measure of success and build confidence as an investor or just as a person who thinks about their economic well-being long-term that actually gives them the confidence and the ability to say, oh, this thing that was my side hustle, I can actually go pursue that. But for many, just the baseline worry of like, am I going to have enough to cover my bills? They can't pursue those things until they sort of get over that hump, right? And we see our consumers, like 63% of Americans often live paycheck to paycheck.
Right.
And so there's both the excitement and opportunity of the side hustle or being your own boss, but in some ways there's also the incremental earning opportunity that is created that people want to pursue.
Right, okay. Well, we are going to talk a little bit about AI, and I'm wondering how you see that shaping your industry and your company and what it might mean to your customers as well.
Well, I mean, AI is really interesting. We just heard, I think, really interesting stuff from the prior speakers around AI and sort of the need for security and how it can actually improve consumer experience. I also think both in the mid to long term, AI has the tremendous, I think, transformative power to drive down the cost of goods and services, which actually then frees up capital for consumers to either invest or put toward whatever their goal is. I also think, interestingly, when we think about wealth creation, certainly when you look at where the market is today, some of the sort of biggest movers and some of the great opportunity is investing in the technologies themselves. And that's certainly something we provide access to on our platform. Although, interestingly, I think that folks like us in the room who are students of technology are obsessed with AI from an investment perspective. I think retail consumers haven't quite caught that craze yet.
Not yet.
But we certainly provide access to it and exposure to it on the platform because we think it's important in the mix.
Sorry.
No, we think it's important to have in the mix.
And are you concerned that once that fever for AI catches on with the retail investor, that you might have that would increase risks for them taking big bets on AI, large?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have all lived through whether it is sort of the peak of hype or the trough of disillusionment on things like crypto. Yes, I know we can't say it aloud. It's like Voldemort now. Or, back in the day, I remember in the early 2000s, it was the year of mobile for 10 years. And then finally it was. And I would say the way we like to think about it is it's super unsexy, but balanced, diverse portfolio with a buy and hold strategy is the thing that outperforms year over year over year. So getting exposure there is great. And we really try through both advice and guidance and our managed portfolios to guide people to get the right exposure based on their risk profile, but not to over-index on any one category, even if it's a great category like AI, is actually not a good long-term investing strategy.
Okay.
In the same way, you wouldn't want to have over-invested in
right.
horse and buggy 120 years ago.
Okay, fair enough. I wonder if we could just step back for a minute and think about the American dream, which was part of the theme for our panel. What do you think is the state of the American dream right now? Does it belong in the U.S.? We have got an attack on women's rights. We've got gun control issues. So I wonder, are you optimistic?
So I am inherently an optimistic person always. And it's interesting, Larry Fink in his letter to investors this year from BlackRock wrote that investing in some ways is actually the most profound act of optimism one can engage in, because you're essentially saying, I believe the future is going to be better, and therefore, I want to be in it and make a bet on that. Which I hadn't really thought about that before, but actually is a perfect framing for what our consumers do and sort of what we ask of ourselves every day. That said, I think the desire for your own future and for your children or the next generation's future to be better than it is, and to have the security of knowing that and some measure of freedom about the choices you make, we sort of characterize that as the American dream, but it's actually kind of universal.
Yeah.
I would say, almost all of the things you talked about, which are real social ills and challenges, not in every instance, but in many instances, when you think about healthcare insecurity or racial inequality, a lot of those things have deep roots in poverty and economic inequality. And the more we can all collectively work using technology, whether it's AI or anything else that drives down costs for consumers and creates broader access and broader fair and equal and equitable access, is a tremendous enabler of actually achieving that goal and completing some of the experiments that America started hundreds of years ago, but many other nations started thousands of years ago. And the way I kind of think about that right now is that I think there's a real return to, I'm going to say, the beginning of optimism. I don't think we're fully in it. It's certainly been, I say this all the time inside our team, which is, given the events of the last 3 or 4 years, we should just banish the phrase from English, barring any unforeseen events.
Right.
because that seems to be all we are encountering. But I think when we look out, it's interesting. Numerator did this great study with U.S. consumers, basically talking about sort of their level of optimism about the economy and also a little bit about their temperature check on the state of fintech and whether it was going to help them or not. And consumers still concerned, but less concerned than they were 12 months ago. Like, they believe they see sort of the economy rounding the corner, and for them that is a representation that. But I did an informal study of like about 20 friends of mine who work in around fintech or in tech generally, and they're more optimistic. Now, I think some of that is that investors and people who work in this sector tend to have a slightly longer time horizon they're looking at. But I also think we have started to see kind of return to growth, return of engagement, and a belief that like some of the bedrock systems that you alluded to actually have kind of like held together and allowed us to sort of move forward a bit. So that certainly makes me optimistic.
That is a nice vision that you paint. I think a lot of people would agree with you. I wonder, I know that before you joined Stash, you worked in venture capital.
Yep.
Can you, for the people here running on their own startups, what advice do you have about what they could bring, what could be brought from the corporate world into the sort of startup culture?
Sure. It's interesting because I have worked both in large corporates and in startups back and forth for most of my career. And I do think in the startup world, there is a real bias that sort of says people who work in big companies don't really know what they're doing and have nothing to teach startup world. And I would say sometimes that bias goes both ways. And I think there's something to bring from both directions. Certainly the speed and the scrappiness and the adaptability of startups almost every large enterprise would benefit from.
Right.
But I actually think, given the pace with which employees tend to move in and out of startups, I think it has created this sort of famine of talent management and leadership across the startup environment, because most startups don't want to invest in the teaching, training, and development that's required to move someone from being an amazing individual contributor to being a great people manager and talent developer. And so if I think about that married with the real drive within startups for people to get promoted really quickly, it creates this sort of environment where lots of people who are amazing individual contributors end up in positions where they have to manage other humans, and they haven't built that skill set yet. And that is a thing that I think corporates actually do really well.
Okay.
And that is a really easy, like, that is a known best practice, really easy to import, and the leverage and the speed which it would actually add to most startups would be amazing.
Okay.
And so that is like one thing that I wish all startups would invest in.
Do you think startups tend to think of that as possibly slowing them down if they were to go that route?
I think it is both. If you know that the average tenure of people in your company before they move to another company is 18 to 24 months, it's hard in the immediate term to say, like, well, why should I invest in developing them if they're not going to be here?
Right.
I also think there is a sense of, like, oh, that might slow us down. I actually think it is one of those things where, like, measure twice, cut once, which is you invest a little bit of this in the beginning of people's career, and they are just able to go so much further, so much faster, if you just give them a little bit of that foundation.
That's great. And maybe this will be my last question, and we'll see how much time we have. But what is your number one priority right now as the CEO of Stash? Like, you're 1 year in, right?
I'm just about 100 days in.
Oh.
But it's startup time, which means it feels both like 2 days and 2 decades, because it is the weird kaleidoscoping of time that happens. Number one priority, I mean, look, the thing that I go to sleep thinking about and wake up thinking about is what are we doing to help our consumers on their journey? And especially given what we talked about, state of the American dream, what consumers are worried about, how can we help them sort of unlock their potential as investors and achieve that economic security? I think about it all day, every day.
Okay, that's really nice. Well, I guess, thank you so much. I mean, if I can just tack on one last question, I cover boards at Fortune. Corporate boards is just becoming a really interesting area of corporate life. And I know you've been involved in boards, and one of the big challenges, I think, is board diversity, getting more diverse candidates into the pool. Can you tell me a little bit about how you think about that and what you've managed to do?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's a really important issue. I think people spend a lot of time talking about, although never enough, about diversity at the leadership level of the organization, but not nearly as much time, especially inside of private companies, thinking about diversity at the board level. During my time as a venture capitalist, I sat probably on 12 or 14 different private boards over that time, and I think in all but one instance, I was the only woman, and there were rarely any people of color on the board. And so, look, I think great progress has been made, especially on public boards where there's even more attention. There's actually attention being paid. But I had the opportunity to sit on the board of Squarespace as an independent director before it went public. And as we were gearing up to go public, I called Anthony, the CEO, and I said, look, I know you're thinking about how to constitute all the committees. I want to chair nomination and governance, which helps the board kind of hire new board members, among other things. And he said, okay, cool. Why do you want to do that? And I was like, because as our lovely investor board members rotate off, I am going to help you transform your board members where your diversity is a middle-aged white Jewish lady into something that is really diverse and actually looks like your customer base. And we've done a great job starting on that journey and transformation. But I think it is one of those things that, like, until you're inside the machine, you don't know, like, what are all the subtle nuances and, like, the roles you need to ask for so you can really be in a position to influence the changes that you want to see happen.
And what does the board look like now?
Well, we've only added one new board member since we went public, because that was only about a year ago. And we replaced a lovely middle-aged white man with a wonderful woman of color, Lila Montgomery, who is a tremendous operator and investor.
Okay, so it's a start. Well, thank you so much, Liza. It was really great to speak with you, and best of luck at Stash.
Thank you so much. Thanks, guys.